Good afternoon. So we had already looked into what criminology is, what is crime. We looked into the definition and what is the nature of criminology as a discipline. Next, before getting to know about any subjects, it is important to look into the historical perspectives of that particular discipline. So today's topic is historical perspectives through various schools of criminology. Human thinking in the previous times were mostly predominated by religious ideas. So, whatever group dynamics they had, or whatever human relations were there, it was usually regulated through myths, superstitions, and religious beliefs. Mostly, the causation of crime and aspects related to crime, they had very little attention as to why a offender committed that crime or what exactly was the factors or environmental factors or psychological factors that led an offender to commit a crime. So the causation of crime as such was very vague. Usually it was mostly in relation to religious ideologies itself. So, through this particular topic, we look into the theoretical dimension of criminology and what are the various ideas about how crime is caused and what were the philosophical thoughts that were present uh, in the past era is what we look into through this particular topic. So the first school of thought in criminology is called as pre-classical thoughts. So the period of 17th and 18th century in Europe, uh, they were predominantly dominated by religious ideologies, okay, through the thoughts provided by St. Thomas Aquinas. And according to him, the concept of divine right of king was in relation to the idea of monarch or monarchy. The scientific knowledge, as I had mentioned earlier, the scientific knowledge in relation to crime or the concept of crime was very vague. There were no much theories or ideas related to what led a person to commit crime. Usually, it was a belief that a man is very simple by nature and all of his actions or all of his behaviors are controlled by some superpower. So basically, in the pre-classical era, they believed that man commits a crime due to the influence of some external spirit, either a demon or a devil. Okay, there was no concept as in why a person committed crime. Was it because of his thought process or was it because of any environmental factors? No. What they believed was because a person was possessed by a demon or a devil, they committed crime. Okay, so an offender commits a wrongful act not because of his own free will but due to the influence of some external superpower. So the punishments provided were basically worships, sacrifices, and ordeals by water and fire. This was how they would try to relieve a victim from the influence of evil spirit. So, in the ancient times, the manner of trials in criminal cases were basically an ordeal. Ordeal is basically an ancient test of guilt. So, what they would do is, if someone has committed a crime, they would either throw that person into fire, throw that person into water after tying a stone to his neck, or administer an oath by calling upon God's punishment, or either trial by battle, etc. So these were the ordeals that were provided to someone who would commit crime. And the right of the society to punish the offender was very well recognized. Usually, they treated an offender as an deprived person who could be cured only by torture and pain. So the concept was crime was usually in connection with the possession of a superpower, and the punishment provided for that crime was either torture or pain. So these were the only ideologies through how a person could be transformed from committing crime. So that's the end of pre-classical era. Moving on to the next school of thought, the classical school. Okay, now what we have seen in the pre-classical is that it was usually religious ideologies or religious myths and superstitions which helped a person to identify if a person has committed crime or not. While coming to classical school, more of scientific thoughts were scientific knowledge was brought into picture. Okay, so during the Enlightenment period, that is in the 18th century, the classical school of thought came into being, and the proponents of this classical school was Jeremy Bentham and Cesare Beccaria. So according to them, the causes of criminal behavior is because a man is a calculating animal. That is, a person has a free will in making decisions. So based on that free will, they tend to commit crime. So if a person is committing a crime, he knows what he is doing. He knows what his actions would lead to, and based upon that, he would make decision whether to commit a crime or not. So the punishment for crime during the classical era stated that they need to provide such punishments wherein a person would deter from committing crime. So as long as the punishment is proportional and fits the crime, and if it's properly carried out, deterrence would occur. So, as I mentioned earlier, Beccaria is one of the pioneers of modern criminology. Okay, so he provided the naturalistic theory of criminality by rejecting the pre-classical idea that there is power of evil spirit when a person commits crime. So, according to him, the emphasis of on mental phenomena of the individual and the concept of free will was what he focused upon. So according to him, for punishments or for proper deterrence to happen, there need to be a reform in the criminal justice system that existed during the Enlightenment period. So according to him, if a person commits crime, the harm is not only to the victim, but the harm is also caused to the society. Okay, and for him, punishment worked in two levels. One is specific deterrence, so that that particular if a offender commits a crime, if he is given punishment, he would not commit the crime again. That is specific deterrence. And the other is to provide an example to the public of the consequences of committing crime. Okay, so that's how present punishment systems came into being. So based upon Beccaria's ideology is how punishment is being provided today. And crime problem could be traced not to bad people but to bad laws. So basically, Beccaria stated that if a person commits a crime and if he does it again, it's not because he's a bad person, but it's because the law of the land is very bad or very poor. So, as I mentioned earlier, the modern criminal justice system had to guarantee equal treatment before the law for all people. This same ideology is what is being followed today. Okay, so the present criminal justice system is based on the ideas provided by Cesare Beccaria. So, some of the principles that were provided by Beccaria, which was helpful in developing various theories, in forming a base for the criminal justice system, which we have present, which is presently working today, is based upon these principles. The first is that law should be used to maintain social contract. So there should be a social contract wherein the public tries to develop and make society better rather than ill-treating the society or getting into acts which would let down the society. So there should be laws that needs to be used to maintain social contract, and laws should be created by only legislatures and not by all common people. And this is the same ideology which works in policy making today. The next point was the judges should impose punishment only in accordance with the law. Usually what happens is when the punishment is provided, there are chances that judges interpret laws in their own way, or they try to impose punishment in their own way. No, that's not what needs to be done. According to Beccaриa's principle, it should be imposed, the punishment should be imposed only in accordance with the law, and the judges should not interpret laws in their own way. The punishment should be based on pain and pleasure principle. I had mentioned earlier that the concept of free will was, something that Beccaria came up with. So, according to that free will principle, if a person is going to commit a crime, he would look at the pros and cons. That is, the what are the gains he would get out of committing the crime, or what are the disadvantages or the losses that he would get by committing the crime. So they would look at the pros and cons. If the pros are good, or if he gets a lot of gain from that, then he would commit that particular crime. So committing that particular crime gives him not only gain but also gives him pleasure. Rather, if that particular person has a lot of disadvantages by committing a crime, it will lead to more of pain. So that's a concept of pleasure and pain. So punishment should be based upon that. If committing a crime gives him a lot of pleasure, then equal amount of punishment should be provided to that person. The punishment should be based on the act and not the actor. What happens in present society or in our laws today is that if it's a juvenile, if it's a first time offender, there are a lot of laws wherein punishment is reduced, right? But as per Beccaria, during the pre-classical era, if be it a child or an old aged person or a woman commits a crime, that act should be punished, not the actor, not the person. If it's a child also, if it's an old person also, if it's a woman also, if they committed a grievous crime, then they should be punished upon the act that they have committed. The punishment should be determined by the crime. So whatever crime they're doing, accordingly they should be punished. Not that all, like how it was in pre-classical era, even if you tell a small lies, they were treated as crime and they would be punished in a severe form. That's not how it should be. According to Beccaria, whatever crime they do, the punishment should be determined according to that. And the punishment should be provided exactly when the offender is caught. It should be prompt and it should be very effective in nature. All people should be treated equally. Even if a king commits a crime or even if a poor person commits a crime, both of them should be given punishment equally. That's what he meant by all people should be treated equally. The abolishment of capital punishment was firstly provided by Beccaria. He was the one who insisted that capital punishment should be abolished, and also the use of torture to gain confessions should be abolished. Uh, Mainly, his idea focused upon stating that it is better to prevent crime than to punish them. So the ideas of deterrence, the ideas of preventing crime, and making laws, treating everyone equally, all of these concepts uh, started coming up in the Enlightenment period. So before that, this inequality, use of torture, not trying to understand why a person commits crime, all of these existed. All of these were further questioned and answers related to that was provided in the classical period by Beccaria. Looking into the next proponent of classical school of thought, Jeremy came up with the concept of utilitarianism. That is, all human actions are calculated in accordance with their likelihood of bringing happiness or pleasure or unhappiness or pain. The same concept that I had explained earlier in regard with Beccaria, the concept of free will. So, according to Jeremy, people weigh the probabilities of present, future pleasures against those of the present and future pain. So basically, if a person is committing a crime or before he commits a crime, he would look into whether that particular act would give him happiness or unhappiness. Based upon that, they calculate all of the factors and then commit a crime. So basically humans are like human calculators who try to look into the factors or the equations in order to decide whether a particular crime is worth committing or not. So if pain outweighs the gain, obviously he would not commit the crime. If gain outweighs the pain, obviously that person would commit a crime. So those were the thoughts of the both proponents of classical school. Now the main concepts as such of classical school is that it is crime is an act of an individual and not his intent, and it is concerned with the act rather than criminal intent. So in present era, if you have to study crime, or most of us who are from law background, when we look into crime, we not only look into the action but also the intent, the mental intent or the intention for committing the crime. Whereas during the classical school, they mostly focused upon the act rather than the intent. Okay, and according to them, punishment, they accepted punishment as a principal method of inflicting pain, humiliation, and disgrace in order to create fear in man and to control his behavior. So by providing punishment, they would be control over human behavior, as well as they would be this concept of fear or deterrence that could work out very well. The prevention of crime was more important than providing punishment for crime. So the concepts of rehabilitation, reformation, all of this began in the classical school of thought. They supported the right of the state to punish the offenders in the interest of public security. I had mentioned earlier, wherein Beccaria stated that it's not just the individual who is being affected because of crime, it's the society also that gets affected. So if the society as such gets affected, it is the responsibility of the state to punish the offenders. And equalization of justice, which meant equal punishment for the same offense, irrespective of even if they are from the higher economic background, or if they are kings, or if they are any person from a low economic background. If they have committed a crime, equal punishment for the same offense should be provided. And as I had mentioned earlier, the use of arbitrary powers of judges, all of these were, tried to modify by the classical school of thought. So looking into the next part, that is the major shortcomings of the classical school. For every theory, there would be a shortcoming, or there would be someone who would state that instead of looking at a concept like this, we can have a opposite way or opposite idea as to how a theory should be treated or rectified. So similarly, when we look into the historical perspective, each school of thought has its own shortcomings, which actually has helped in developing various theories related to crime causation. So some of the major shortcomings of the classical school is that it proceeded on an abstract presumption of free will. Okay, that is without devoting any attention to the state of mind. Mainly here they looked into the act and not the intent. Act and intent both combined together helps us in understanding crime better. So one of the major shortcomings is that they focused more on act of the person and the concept of free will. Second is that equal punishment for same offense, making no distinction between the first time offenders and habitual offenders, and varying degrees of gravity of the offense was a major shortcoming. Uh, in present society, as I mentioned earlier, we would look at if that person is a habitual criminal, if that person is a first time offender, if it's a child or a juvenile, etc. Right? But in the classical school, they try to say that equal punishment should be provided for all, irrespective of their religion, irrespective of their race, their age, etc. So that is one of the shortcomings of major shortcomings of the classical school. So these two are the shortcomings.